Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Good evening. I love the energy in this room. You have the right spirit because unlike much of what you will read on Devex this week, this is a good news story. We're here to talk about opportunity. Just thinking about this question makes me think of my Saturday mornings. I'll tell you my Saturday morning routine. My two children, young kids, we make them go to a Spanish school every Saturday. You can just imagine how excited they are by this. They look a little bit like the world leader is told they have to sit through another long speech at the UN General Assembly. And they remind me every Saturday morning, you know, they don't take credit cards and I need to buy lunch at the school, so we have to scramble for a little bit of cash or change in the couch cushions, in the drawers, in the car, and it's a scramble. It reminds me a little bit of what this community has gone through. As we see ODA declining, as we see the needs for climate adaptation, people are scrambling. Where's the money going to come from is one of the topics you hear on this stage all day. And the community we're gathering here today is here to say, hey, we found it. We looked under the couch cushions and we found $23 trillion of assets. What? Yeah, you heard that right, in the form of public development banks. Now, this is not a new revelation, to be honest. Many of the people in this room have known this for a long time. Rémy, who's with us and is going to join us in a moment on stage, is sort of the godfather of this idea and this community and has gone out and said, listen, we're understanding the development picture wrong because we draw too small of a circle. We need to draw a much bigger circle. There's much more happening in the world today. And we're going to talk about that today and what the opportunity is if we draw that circle more broadly. So we're thrilled to put this event together in partnership with AFD, the French Development Agency, with Finance in Common, with the International Development Finance Club. And we're just going to get started with a conversation. I'm going to ask Rémy to join me on stage, along with Serge Ekué. Rémy and Serge, please join. You can give them a round of applause, yeah? Please, sir, yeah. Rémy, let me start with you since I've already mentioned you. And as I say, you've had this idea for a long time. This is not new, but maybe its time has come, in a sense. The momentum you've built with Finance in Common, with the International Development Finance Club, as we go into a new, very challenging period, when people are looking for a new, not only new money, but a new model, a new mental model even of how to think about development and climate, how do you think, what is this opportunity of public development banks and what do people kind of get wrong about it or misunderstand or underappreciate?
Thank you, Serge, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, there's the deep trouble in cooperation, of course, here in New York. And we certainly have to find new ways, a new architecture that would be at the scale of what we are facing. We were in Seville a few weeks ago for the Financing for Development conference, and I was struck by let's say, the gravity, the seriousness. Everybody's working to surpass that trouble. So we don't know exactly if we go back to the 1990s, MDGs, ODA, I'm not sure. If we will go back to the 1960s, geopolitics, independence, national forces within the framework, or to the early 19th century. Hopefully not predation, mercantilism, but there are three references we can have in history, and hopefully we will combine all these in a new, large, vast, efficient machinery for cooperation.
It does feel like we are at that hinge point in history. Anything can happen. We can go in any direction. Serge, how does it feel to you? You are, of course, the president and the chair of the board of the West African Development Bank. You also chair the International Development Finance Club, coordinating the world's largest multilateral development banks, regional development banks. How are you seeing this moment we're in right now and the opportunity for your members?
Thank you, Raj. Hi, everyone. Raj, thank you for your question. Yes, undoubtedly, we are our corner of something where we don't know where we're heading to. But the one thing we're sure about is we need to change the way we've been working so far. This is an absolute necessity. The worldwide international financial architecture needs to change. And one of the basic reasons, simple reason, is that the need for development of the world has never been so crucial. The need for funding, the right way to fund infrastructure, the consequences of the climate change, ways to finance agriculture, health and education, housing, affordable housing, social housing, energy. This needs to change, and we're more in the vein of not the speed, but the acceleration, which is a derivative of the speed. This is where we are now.
Yeah, I guess, Rémy, the core idea that you and Serge are promoting, the idea that these public development banks, multilateral development banks need to work together, need to align, there's a core assumption there that alignment is going to unlock something. Explain that. Like, why does it matter if they all come together and meet? What does this alignment achieve?
So I was in Addis 10 years ago, and in Seville. And yes, there was someone missing in Addis Abeba. Serge was missing, meaning a significant number of public financial institutions were not around the table a decade ago. And the main difference between Addis and Seville is there. And it's reflected in the conclusions, actually. So we worked very hard through IDFC, through Finance in Common, to give a voice to our to our peers, the regional and national public financial institutions. You can find online the database, 536 for now. About 2.5 trillion existing investments. We don't know exactly the quality of it. We're working hard to make it green and sustainable, but really I invite all of you to think of us as a system, of course following the guidance set by the governments, our shareholders, but also deeply connected with all the other stakeholders, including because it's an issue Serge raised, the private sector and private finance. This is our role in financial system forever. So this is Finance in Common. We have 3 steps to follow. I think we reached in Seville the first one, which was just to invite and gather us all. So we have the MDBs, of course, as a system, as global and regional platforms, and then we plugged below the rest of the architecture so that everybody can consider. So that's a done thing. We're on stage with you. Second, and this is now where we are developing tools to provide the proper incentives as deep as possible in the community. Just want to stress 3 of them. We have a very interesting work ongoing with MIGA in the World Bank to provide guarantee, reduce the cost of capital, help give double the number of public development banks having access to market resources by 2030. So this is about mobilizing private finance, market finance. Second, with TCX, the European Union, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, we are working on currency risks. Also having a global common toolkit to reduce this, and we know the private sector is extremely insistent on that. And third, of course, IDFC, for instance, as a facility to provide technical assistance, capacity building for the institutions that are waiting for that, notably on climate. So that's second stage. And then, of course, the end game would be for these institutions, if they satisfy criteria set on the market, to become, let's say, an asset class. You have sovereign bonds, you have municipal bonds, you could have public development bank bonds. Maybe the rating agencies will look at us with a different look. And hopefully, maybe even the regulatory framework could help us play our full counter-cyclical role. So this is the kind of architecture we are building. Of course, able, because we have to find a way to bring back solidarity, concessional resources we are missing or lacking right now. So this is through the investment narrative a way to bring back public mandates for our institution to implement.
I mean, it's a bold vision, and it sounds like if it were to work, you could unlock vast sums of money if you can have a true asset class that can be rated at a higher investment grade rating, and you could potentially unlock private money around the world to invest.
And of course, think about specialization. For instance, the local bank, the national banks, their main business is to originate. Ajay Banga is speaking a lot about originate, aggregate, so maybe that's the work of regional banks, and then distribute, sell to the market. Of course, with global tools to de-risk, to accelerate, and this is the kind of effect this machinery could provide.
Yes, Serge, I want to get your take on that, and in particular, thinking about this, kind of the different layers that exist. We have the public development banks. Some of them are national, regional. You've got multilateral development banks like yours that are at the regional level. Then there's the World Bank and the African Development Bank. What is the value proposition that a regional bank like yours brings? You're closer to the countries, you're closer to the projects, but what's that really mean from a value proposition standpoint in this system, as Rémy is describing it?
Very good. Look, as you know, there's been an election recently at the African Development Bank, and our common friend, the president, Sidi Oulta, the new president of the African Development Bank, in one of his latest speech, his first speech, by the way, clearly mentioned that, and 100% agree with him, that the African Development Bank cannot be everything to everyone. And I think it equally applies to the World Bank. The point is, we need again to redefine the international and more specifically the African financial architecture, in the sense that under the leadership of the African Development Bank, the regional banks, the African regional banks, can be the arm, the concrete arm on the ground to execute a number of propositions the African Development Bank, by definition, because over the years, these large institutions, no one can deny, could have been, I would say, are we under the Chatham House rules, or it's...
We're not.
So,
we assume
right.
This is out there, but say it anyway. It's okay. Everybody wants to hear.
So I'll find the diplomatic words to express myself, but... I mean, no one can deny that in terms of efficiency, let me put it this way, we could have done better. Yeah. All right? Okay. There's room for improvement. All right? Good. The point is, I think that being on the ground, being very local, we're very focused. We are in the intimacy of our clients, be it on the public or on the private sector. What I mean by the intimacy, I can guarantee you that there's no transaction in West Africa that would not come onto my desk. No way. We see everything. I could opine on every transaction. So, which literally means that the knowledge, the way we understand the transaction. No one knows better West Africa than the West African Development Bank. Let me add one more thing, if I may. Raj, the value proposition also includes something that is very new and that Rémy has alluded a little bit when he said that 10 years back, BYD was not in Addis, clearly not. It means, and today we are sitting next to each other, all right? And we're very close. We were hands in hand, not only between the Agence Française de Développement and the West African Development Bank, but you know, there are close links between FIC and IDFC, where FIC would enlarge and IDFC would deepen. What we add again into our value proposition is this capacity to innovate, to be agile. Rémy mentioned this originate to distribute. I've been in the bank for the past 5 years, and we are very sectorally, I would say, organized institution. But the method we have implemented is originate, we structure. What I mean by structuring is to move from aspiration to bankable projects. And then we underwrite, which means that we need to have the capacity, underwriting capacity, which leads to the question of the capital, the tier one capital, or I would even say more, the capital structure from tier one, tier two, hybrid, mezzanine, senior debt, etc., which leads to our capacity to underwrite. My point is not to have the largest balance sheet, but the most efficient balance sheet, considering the capital I have. And then, yes, we distribute either the native risk, the risk as it has been underwritten, or we securitize it, and different ways of securitizing it. So the whole chain, originate to distribution, I mean, it's no new in the banking industry. It's no new at all, but it is for development banks.
It is, you're right. And just to help bolster your point about the value of different banks at different levels, I think Rémy and I were in the same session, a Chatham House Rules session, where the head of a public development bank said, you know, one of the big global multilateral banks came and opened an office in my country, and it was open for years. And they did not make a single investment. Everything seemed too risky to them. And meanwhile, this head of the public development bank said, I see lots of opportunities, right? And it shows you being closer changes your risk profile. Rémy, I want to get into a related topic because we just heard this from Serge. I want to understand better the incentives. Okay, we understand these are big bureaucracies often, especially the large MDBs. President Ajay Banga of the World Bank is trying to change the corporate scorecard. He's trying to get people to organize themselves and be incented by different things than they were in the past. Maybe in the past it was sign a loan, right? Now they're thinking, and maybe grow the balance sheet. Now, don't worry about how big your balance sheet, get these projects off, distribute them. How do you get the incentives right in the new model you're designing so that public development banks, regional and multilateral, that they all see an incentive to really work together and play their right role in the system?
I commend the spirit and the work President Banga is pushing. He came into office. His first visit was in Abidjan to see the African Development Bank. He was in Cape Town for the last Finance in Common Summit in February alongside the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting. And he's repeatedly saying that it's about partnership. Of course, between MDBs, but also reaching out to other institutions that could provide their contribution. I believe the market discipline will help. So that's why I'm stressing the importance of bond issuance. Because the public banks are not perfect. You can have institutions pretending being a public development bank, but when you're a public development bank, you need to have a long-term financing, patient financing, you need to have internal procedures to satisfy the quality of the investments. It's a difficult business, it's a specific business, and this is always...
and the bond market provides a kind of discipline to that.
Of course, if you have a set of criteria to issue the bonds, then, and you have to verify it periodically, then it's a very strong discipline, on top, of course, of what our shareholders and governance is asking us. Then, of course, the World Bank is the knowledge bank. There's this reform. So I think being able to provide the whole community top-notch technologies, advice is particularly important to help unlock the full potential of what we're talking about.
In just the minute or two we have left, what is a concrete thing you want to see come? You talked about Sevilla being a big change from Addis. We're here in UNGA, we're about to go to COP30, that's where the attention will come. What is a tangible outcome you want to happen at COP30 that will advance this agenda? Maybe I can start with you, Serge.
Yeah, thank you. Look, in a context where no one can deny that the donors' fatigue is a reality. Donors' fatigue is a reality. So we need to change the way we've been working so far. So on our way to the COP30, I think that we need to reinvent new ways of funding our development, as I mentioned earlier, notably when it comes to climate. When it comes to the respect of our commitments to fund agriculture, to fund social priorities, to fund mobility and renewable energy globally. So the concrete outcome would be the commitment of this new environment that we all accept that the world has changed. We need to apply and abide by new rules, the rules we would have defined ourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about, incentives. You know, what is it that makes these banks want to push themselves to add new rules themselves that make life harder in a way? It's going to be more challenging. But what do you think, Rémy, we want to see come out?
So we are collectively preparing very seriously Belém and COP30. And beyond Belém, you know, I heard my president, Emmanuel Macron, giving a bit of a direction for the G7 presidency next year. We have the US heading the G20, so there will be other milestones. Three ideas. The first one is carbon markets, Article 6. So, you know, we were waiting for a decade for the Baku decision about a carbon market. We know carbon markets have an issue of integrity. You know, they are mostly totally private for now. They need our institution to provide their public signature, their capacity, again, to originate, to buy credits, and make it a very important part of the financing of climate. So our proposal is really to put the force of our group, again, trillions, there. And we are waiting for the European Union to give also this incentive in its NDC. That's one. Second, we believe in the country platform process. The Brazilian presidency intend to announce, I don't know, 15, 20 more. They have their own. And you know, in Brazil, the institution that is at the operational heart of the country platform is BNDES. So you need to rely on a national public financial institution, of course, to apply the guidance set by the government and to gather all flows, international and domestic. And if so, maybe we could reach the 1.3 trillion of the NCQG decision as fast as possible. Maybe we could count also Article 6 credit both within the 300 so that we do the 300 rapidly. And then we discuss about the main question, which is the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue and the transformation of the financial system as a whole, public and private. And on this, my last word is, I hope from climate, revising the ODA framework next year and beyond, we invent this new framework we are missing for a decade that could combine climate and development, the most vulnerable and the global public goods, and yes, set the right incentives.
You know, I hear many people ask me, when are we going to have a big vision, a big idea? We're reeling from the cuts to aid, the public pushback on ODA, and I think what you just heard is a big, bold vision. It's technical, it's financial, but it's a big, bold vision that can unlock a lot of funding. So please join me in thanking our fantastic participants here, Serge, Ekué, Amélia. We're going to move on to a panel now, so I'll ask you to leave the stage. Okay, we're gonna dive right into this conversation because as I was ending the last conversation saying, hey, this is a bold vision, one of the things I like about it is in my line of work, you hear a lot of the same things over and over. This is not that. This is not lamenting the state of the world. This is actually a big idea. But that doesn't mean it's an easy idea. That doesn't mean unlocking this just simply happens. So maybe I can start with you, Tariye. We've been talking, like the skeptics in the crowd might say, we've heard about something similar for a long time. We've heard about private capital is going to come to the rescue. You know, I remember being here in New York in 2015 when the SDGs were created. I was on stage with Bill Gates, actually, and somebody in the audience asked him, you know, where are these trillions going to come from? And Bill looked very annoyed, and he said, what about innovation? You know, what about financial? But it hasn't really come, has it? What's holding it back? What do we need to do to get from where we are to unlock the vast sums that are available through public development banks and this broader vision?
Well, maybe I'll have a bold response, which is to say it has come and it's coming. But what we want is a significantly greater amount. And that's the shift that we're going through. I think if you look at the last let's say 10 to 15 years as we've built out blended finance as a discipline. So you're right, 10 years ago, blended finance wasn't an established construct. And over the last few years, the architecture has started, you know, really spending quite a bit of time on concessionality, on additionality, and the mobilization of capital along the public spectrum through the MDB system, public funding, and private capital. You know, the numbers, while the numbers remain low, we are seeing about 15 to 19% of capital, at least in the energy transition space, going to emerging markets. That in itself is an achievement in that there has been progress. We're seeing increasing amounts of private sector investors that have a compelling proposition. I think we're in a transition phase right now where the cost of renewable energy and battery storage, especially for emerging markets and developing economies, is becoming, you know, in line with bankability. Yeah. And you're also finding that any viability gaps or what concessional finance is doing in the blended finance stack is not as what we experienced in the CIF in 2008, which was effectively buying down 6 years of commercial viability. Rather, what we're doing now is managing perception risk. You're managing scaling. You're managing bringing in, you know, international pools or pension funds, as an example.
Because you're saying these projects are now very bankable. They're clearly investable in a way they weren't.
They're increasingly bankable, and here's why you know they're bankable. Because 80% of the funding is going to the rest of the world, right? And so the technologies themselves, the business models themselves are bankable. What we're doing right now is framing that within an emerging market and developing economy construct, which means that we're now incentivizing the allocation of capital to these countries that have different experiences. You will have some new business models. They're going to design models for themselves. And I want to touch on the public development banks. That's why they're so relevant, because they're on the ground. They know the developers. They know the unique challenges. They know their commercial banks, their pension funds, and they can stitch together that connection, which has actually been lacking.
And I should have said at the outset, you know this well because you've been a private investor on the ground.
Correct.
And you now are the CEO of CIF, the Climate Investment Funds. You are Tariye Gbadegesin. I'm sorry I didn't say that too at the beginning. Let me turn to you, Valerie Hickey with the World Bank. You are the Global Director for the Climate Change Group there. Because Tariye is giving us a very optimistic view that, hey, this transition is underway. It's not bad news, it's going, and we just have to accelerate it. And actually, it's even better news. The technology transition is happening at the same time as a finance transition, and they're going to accelerate each other. Are you that optimistic? And how should we understand this space and how it's evolving?
100%, because like you said at the start, Raj, I think we need to think about climate as an opportunity agenda. But that means we also can't spend our time reinventing things on climate that we've been doing in other sectors for years. I always smile, for example, you talk about financial engineering. I always smile, but it's really a grimace when I hear my people in the ministries of environment talk about bonds and the innovative instrument, the bond. Bonds have been around hundreds of years. Yes, there's innovation in the margins and sustainability-linked bonds and output-based bonds, sure. But bonds have been around a long time. One of the mistakes I think we make in climate is we think we're reinventing things because we're hearing about them for the first time. Yeah. Blended finance is another great example. Yes. It's been around forever. Since there was public money and private money, there were places where they came together.
But the critics would say, look, it's been around forever, but it hasn't succeeded. There's very little money in blended finance.
Not true. If you look at, I actually think climate and development are the same thing. One of the reasons we spend a lot of investment on our country climate and development reports is to make the argument that these aren't two separate things. We shouldn't be talking about climate finance at the expense of development finance. We should be talking about climate finance to accelerate the impact of development finance and to make the two work together to leapfrog problems. And if we look at the history of development finance, look at the history of bending the curve of poverty. It has happened. 50 years ago, 8 out of 10 people were living in extreme poverty. Today, it's fewer than 1 out of 10. It's too many. It's way too many. The number should be 0. But development finance has worked, and so has private finance. What I'm hearing this week very much is we've done a lot of good things. We've done the financial engineering as PDBs. We're really talking about how do we have mutual reliance. What Serge was saying about specialization and figuring out the local and the regional development banks who are much more intimate with their clients. They're originating. We can aggregate, as Rémy said, and we want to distribute. We just did our first securitization, as you know, from our IFC, our private sector side, just a couple of weeks ago. We can do all of that. We've gotten really good with de-risking instruments. What we haven't been as good at, the next frontier for us in this space, is equity investments. Because what we're hearing a lot from private sector clients is that the de-risking goes so far, and it's great, to the extent that they can find a return that's much larger than the cost of capital, so it's competitive return, but they need that equity investment. That's what's been lacking, and I think that's the next frontier for us.
And that might require either new authorities for some of these organizations we're talking about who don't have the rights to do equity investments, or bringing in more of the development finance institutions into this larger picture, right? Because it is a complex picture of institutions. Maybe, James, I can bring you in on that point, because you represent this group as James Maraghi, as the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Public Finance, and you yourself are an entrepreneur. You have a history in the private markets too. How do you see the opportunity here to unlock a new wave of finance if these entities can align better?
Well, thanks, Raj. I think I would pick from the Africa Union Agenda 2063, for example, has domestic resource mobilization as a central to the development of Africa, right? And if you think about the role that PDBs can play in that context, one of them then would have to be a direct link between policy propositions and bankable projects. Because then the opportunity that's presented to the private sector, it's that which has, is well detailed, for example, in political manifestos, for example. If you I'll pick the Paris Agreement, and then it's drawn down at the local level. The public development banks then play a bigger role, presenting an opportunity to the private sector because they are closer to the ministries and they see the government of the day direction, and they are able to pick on that. But also the other opportunity that PDBs present is the ability to look at their frameworks and present them as transparent as they can to the private sector, because the private sector is only willing to come to an opportunity that's well detailed and transparent. And I think if we pick it as an opportunity, from a government perspective, from a PDP perspective, then it allows the private sector to be more comfortable, because there's a component of building confidence in investments that need to be made.
Right, because they're closer to the ground. They know the government policy, the government goal. They understand the true risk in the market. We're talking about this very casually, like it's a simple idea. Anna, Amélia, Toni, I want to bring you in the discussion, the CEO of COP30. This idea that the climate agenda and the development agenda are one thing. That's very much up for debate these days. That's not so obvious. Even though the World Bank, maybe now half the projects actually check both boxes today. Is it so clear as you work toward COP30, are we going to make a clear statement where the world says, actually, this is one agenda?
Well, we need to wait to see what we get at the end of COP30. Doesn't depend just on the COP30 presidency. If it did, I can tell you the way I would go. But obviously, I think it's a bigger debate. But I can tell you that I've been traveling really all over the world, talking to, obviously, governments, private sector in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, India, China, whatever. And I hear both the private sector in those countries as well as policymakers talking about climate positive growth, which is climate and development being the same thing. So I think the word is out there. Obviously, when we get to negotiation, then you have the convention, what is cooperation and public money, what's private money, who mobilize, developing, common but differentiated. So the negotiation space is different than the real life that we all living in. And what we've seen is that what a convention like the Paris Agreement has helped all of us. Because you're right, Valerie, those terms are not new. Bonds, guarantees, blended finance, but it's new for environmental ministers talking that language. That's really new. And they are talking this language because we had the convention. It's also very, very new for finance ministers to issue bonds that is sustainability bonds or adaptation bonds. So yes, there is a lot of new things happening out there, and this is really interesting. Brazil, we had our G20 presidency last year, and we had that task force, the climate task force, and for the first time we put presidents of central banks, finance ministers, and climate ministers together. And many of the delegations from developed countries who come to, thank you so much. It's the first time I talk to my central bank counterpart. Oh, I just know my finance minister's opinion. So this is really new.
Even within the same government.
Even within the same government. We are lucky in Brazil because our finance minister is great and gets on really well with our environment minister. So that's great. But in most countries, they don't sit together. In most countries, the NGCs are not put together, those people. So what I think is really new and innovative is that now you have finance ministers sitting and being aware about the climate as an opportunity, but also climate as a cost. So they are aware, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of changes going on, and hopefully at COP30, we will be able to, that's what we're trying with the debate about 1.3 trillion. Okay, it's at least 1.3 trillion, let us remember, it's not 1.3 trillion, it's at least, and we're talking about mobilization, but that's a venue for us to get finance ministers, central banks, climate ministers, continue debating so that those terms become normal for everybody. And I think that normality, but I just wanted to make one comment. We asking the whole world to change. The way we produce energy, we need to change. The way we produce food, we need to change. We need to change everything, but the financial sector also needs to change. It's all the sectors will need to change. So maybe some of the instruments that we have now are not good enough, and we need to invent new ones. So all sectors will need to change, and it's not the other sectors fitting into the financial mechanisms that we have, but it's also the financial sector bringing new mechanisms that is good for climate.
Thank you. And I want to mention we're going to come to questions soon, so start thinking of what you want to ask this panel. But Tariye, and actually all of you, maybe you can start us off by help us sketch out what does a project look like in this new world that we want to see that would be different from the past, right? So if I worked at a multilateral development bank 10 years ago, and I thought my job was to meet with the transport minister and plan out a road and sign a loan document, what is development and climate today look like with public development banks firmly in the picture?
Well, I started my career in 2001 at the IMF, and have built it over time, worked in infrastructure, and now in climate. So let me go back to when I started and to what it's like now. And I would say then, there was this the Washington Consensus. Remember that? Remember? That was what we called it. It was the Washington Consensus. And there was a consensus in Washington as to what development should look like. There was a consensus in Washington as to what the project should look like. And there were lines with respect to what the World Bank funded, and there would be ESG, and there was almost a one-to-one, a bilateral type of engagement. And now we have multi-systems, so we have an MDB system, we have a climate finance system, we have private capital, we have the multilaterals all having private sector arms. So the World Bank had the IFC, but now every MDB has either their private sector arm, they've spun it off, they're trying to spin it off, right? And so now the projects are, and this is the other thing, the countries have evolved in their sophistication to have agency. A lot of the folks that in 2001 were receiving the training from the World Bank, hey, they're all trained now and they're just as smart as them and coming up with the innovation that Washington Consensus was telling them about then, right? And so we're seeing the investments that were made in the capacity and the counterparts such that the countries have emerged and they're ready. They've taken agency. And now the countries are saying, we want to be in the lead of the design. We are skilled, we have our strategy, and they are now working with the MDBs to fashion out the public sector segments, the private sector segments, and now those countries have developed financial systems. Many of them have pension funds. In 2001, well, the World Bank was helping them design them. Now countries have them. I'll give you Nigeria, 2007, pension fund reform. There was $1 billion in it. Now there's $30 billion in it. And that's why suddenly, and oh, by the way, public development banks, suddenly we can actually have a chat about a capital stack involving the countries, their public development banks, the MDBs, the private sector, et cetera. So with complexity, yes, it's become more complex, but we've also become way smarter. It's become much, it's become much more integrated. It's multidimensional. And that's why it's easy to fudge over the progress. But there has been tremendous progress for those of us who started when we in the Washington era, Washington Consensus, and where we are now. And it will get more complicated. It will get smarter. It will get efficient. And even more money is going to be deployed.
So Valerie, help us continue this sketch. This is where we are now. What's stopping us from getting to where you want us to go? What are the blockages today?
So I think one blockage that is gone is we've moved past a Washington Consensus to an era where, as MDBs, and I'll speak for the World Bank Group, is we see ourselves in a role of servant leaders, right? I'm an international public servant. I work for the government of Brazil and the people of Brazil. I work for the government and the people of Kenya. You name the country, I work for all of them. Those are my owners. And so we're shifting very much into a very different way of thinking about centering the client and our owners in terms of what they need. And that's why for us, the era of the project is over. And I think the era of thinking about economies differently has begun. And that means focusing and helping governments think about policy. I always say one of the cheapest ways to build a green, inclusive, competitive, robust, secure economy is actually relatively cheap. It's about policy reform. Super tough, but not super expensive. I mean, this is one of the places where the money will never show up on any deal sheet, but think about subsidies. Just agricultural subsidies alone, $2 billion a day. The UNCCD last year at their COP30, I think was the number in Saudi Arabia, talked about, they had a big report saying we need $1 billion a day to fight desertification, because that was the big number.
And there's $2 billion in agriculture
$2 billion a day
subsidies.
in actually accelerating desertification. So there is money. Policy reform matters, partnership matters, and within those partnerships, the countries have to lead, or the community or the small company has to lead, and we have to offer our service, and that means deal sheets. It means thinking through structured finance. It means talking about capital stacks, and it means going back to comparative advantage. We shouldn't be in the business of substituting for commercial finance. Too often, that was the problem with projects. We went in, it was easier, we knew what we were doing, and sometimes public finance distorted local markets, substituted for commercial finance, made it harder to bring the private sector in. We're not in that business anymore.
James, one of the things that's hard to bring the private sector in is a perception of risk, maybe real risk. What do you do to reduce that risk, particularly when it comes to public development banks?
I think I would pick from where Valerie has left, and talking about policy and the deals that are coming. Any private sector player wants to come in a very certain environment, and the role of PDBs then come in that, because PDBs will transcend any government at any particular point. So they offer that opportunity to de-risk that transition, and from a policy perspective, but also they have an opportunity to look from a currency volatility element, as a risk, considering the risk, the currencies of execution and the currencies of borrowing. And also to a greater extent, they have the advantage of having, balance sheets. They might not be very efficient balance sheets, as Serge had said, but they have a balance sheet that's worth presenting, that can be able to leverage, the private sector can be able to leverage to be able to drive that investment and de-risk.
We're going to go to questions in a second. So a last thought from you, Anna. You began describing how we are entering this very new world. Just to the same idea, sketch out what is the thing blocking us from this vision that unlocks far more funding for both the development and a climate agenda.
First, I'm really pleased that you remember the Washington Consensus. How can we forget? But let us hope we will have a Belém Consensus. We need to look for a Belém Consensus that bring this debate about...
And what would that be? What would it be?
The Belém Consensus is to really prioritize the resilience topic and climate coming together. As we said, the climate positive growth is what we're looking for. But the enabling conditions to do that, I think, is really important. Because I'm not sure, I totally agree with you that we need to go, no, it's not any more project, and yes, policy reform, but it's something in between this, and that's some of the blockage. I mean, we have developing countries that say, the problem is you have not passed the right policies. Then we pass the right policies. No, the problem now is that because you don't have NDCs that are investable, then we do the NDCs that are investable. But if we don't, you don't have a country platform, then we do the country platform and they're all there. But if resources from developed countries, private maybe, no, not only because, yes, as he said, there is donors fatigue, but climate is not waiting for anybody's fatigue. Climate is real, in real people's life. So the money needs to flow to the south. We really need to come to the south. And we have the NDCs, we have the country platforms, and there are programs that related to that, and we have the reforms. But if the money doesn't flow, then we have a really big problem in the Belém Consensus, because it's not proven that the money will flow. And developing countries, many of them, we know, the cost of investment in our countries are much higher. Not by the doing of some of those countries, but is how you calculate risk in those countries. And it's very hard for many countries to understand why doing a wind power, a wind farm in Brazil is riskier than a wind farm in, God knows, in Germany. A solar panel in Brazil is riskier as a country that only has sun than a solar farm in Germany.
Well, wind power in the US is even riskier.
In this moment, it's really risky for you to do. So I think the challenge is how we make the level playing field on the cost of investment in developing countries.
Let's go to some questions. Is Rowan Douglas here? Do we have Rowan? I am here. You are here. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. I wanted to go to you for a quick question to get us started, if you would, Rowan. And Rowan is, of course, the CEO of Climate Risk and Resilience at Howden.
Oh, brilliant.
I am indeed, Raj, but actually I'm not here on behalf of Howden. I'm here on behalf of a fantastic public-private partnership that's now 10 years old, the Insurance Development Forum, which is co-chaired by the World Bank and the UNDP and the industry. And I had to arrive a little late, for which I apologize. But I've been pondering the title, and I was wondering, how am I going to... I was asked to be a fire starter.
Please, start a fire.
That's a dangerous thing to be in these days. And I'm sure I may have started a few fires in the past, but I've never been asked to do it. So I thought, how do I start a fire with this title? Scratching my head. And then, Anna, I have to tell you, you provided the inspiration right at the end.
For good or bad?
For good, for good. Because you described the potential Belém consensus, excuse me, Tariye, as the resilience sort of consensus. And of course, I've got to talk about insurance, and so that was the natural segue. And I've been coming to Climate Weeks for well over a decade. And this is the first year I've got invited to the interesting parties. Insurance is finally coming in from a long, cold spell. So if you're inviting, I haven't got any room left in my calendar. But the truth is that finance is made up of three-legged stool. It's made up of credit, lending. It's made of investment. It's also made of insurance. Some people don't actually think of insurance as part of finance, but it is. all that insurance is contingent capital. It's capital that is contractually yours if a defined event occurs. You reach 65, you get a pension, you get sick, you need insurance against a credit default. It's an amazing thing because we come together as societies, communities, to decide what it is we value, our shared health, our shared credit security, and we put money in a pot, not to get a return, but to know that if something happens to us, we get paid out, but critically, ultimately, most of the time, you're paying money so that other people get so that they can be confident to fulfill their dreams. But actually, what it's really all about is managing risk collectively. And you've just taken away the title. I was going to go to that. Right, so how do we manage the continuity between finance and the climate agenda? The climate agenda is all about managing risk. It's about saying we value healthy societies, we value the growth we need, and we realize if we do certain things, we're going to put that at risk. So we want to align finance with the good things that we need to have happen, and also disincentivize or even restrict the wrong things. And capital tends to flow where risk and return is attached. I think the public and private finance sector has tremendously sort of missed an opportunity to take advantage of a sector in the public and private and mutual domain whose job is to manage and calculate and quantify risk. And I assure you they do, but they do it in their own little box over here. But ultimately, that gearbox allows us to properly account for many risks which are currently not being accounted for in public or private finance, not least physical climate risk. It's still ignored, except in the world of insurance. And actually, if we use that to take the medical, to properly account for the risk that we're trying to manage, and then use insurance in all its forms to be a valve as to where capital, be it credit or investment, can be flow in a secure way, and where perhaps it shouldn't go. And I think it would be so exciting if the consensus that you're talking about, Anna, was driven by resilience and protecting what it is we value, which includes mitigation, but actually at long last, perhaps after 100 years of disconnection, that Belém brings the ultimate community product of insurance to the third leg of the stool of finance to create, frankly, the stability and security that we all need.
Thank you very much, Rowan. You certainly did start a fire with that. And I'm going to give this panel a chance in a moment to address it, but I do want to see if we have any other questions in the room. We'll take a couple if we do at once before we have our last thoughts from the stage. Only if you have a burning question. Anyone have anything for the panel? All the way in the back, there's two hands. We'll take both of those questions and just tell us your name, and we have one in the front as well. Tell us your name and organization if you would, and keep your question very brief, please.
Hi, my name is Ben Asari. I represent a company called Katrana Capital, and we are interested in investing in healthcare and pharma in sub-Saharan Africa. In my previous life, I worked for an MDB. I'm not going to say which one. So the issue that I have is part of it is your credit policy. The credit policy and the underwriting guidelines are geared towards big ticket items. But as we know, in a lot of developing countries, there are small ticket items in sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, Latin America. So is it possible to relook your credit policy? Whether maybe you let a commercial bank underwrite the small transactions and you provide a portfolio guarantee, something that will spur up development and the small-scale businesses in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have the mic just past you in the back there. There's one more hand.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Diana Geshengo. I am from Kenya. I work at the Institute for Social Accountability. We're a movement-building organization that works on public finance and debt matters. A very good panel. And my question is, I think, more to Anna. how are we going to balance, particularly for financing, debt and grants for the Global South? Because so far, all the financing that comes, especially in the form of debt, remains very, very extractive. And currently, we are seeing more models of climate debt for climate swaps. And the biggest problem we have is governance. So the money will come, it will be said to have cleared the debt, but ultimately there is nothing that will be done towards climate transition and resilience in that particular order. Finally, we argue, particularly from Africa, that we need to be allowed a chance to also develop, create employment, maybe pollute the environment a bit more, and then we can start contributing to the next fund. What are the considerations there?
Thank you very much for that question. I know we might have a couple more hands, but we're really running out of time. So I'm going to go back to the panel and just say, you don't have to address all these questions. We're just going to pick one or two, and we're going to go from there, because this will be your last comment. And maybe I can begin with you, Tariye, on this question from our colleague in the back from Katrona Capital about big ticket items, the big MDBs kind of gearing toward large-scale projects and missing the boat when so much of the investment opportunities are small-scale, small investments, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Is there a way to bridge that gap? He suggested portfolio guarantees for commercial banks. How are you thinking about that?
Absolutely. A lot of the work that the CIF does with the MDBs is on intermediation strategies, where the MDBs work with syndicating or if providing the funding into commercial banks or, again, national development banks. And so we have examples of that at the CIF in Colombia as an example, where, and even in Turkey, where we provided the concessional capital. It's invested alongside the regional development banks. So in the case of Turkey, it would be EBRD and then the World Bank. In the case of Colombia, it would be the Inter-American Development Bank. And they blend our capital with theirs so as to reduce the cost and then support commercial banks that then in turn can fund SMEs. And this worked very well in Turkey for scaling renewable energy, such that small and medium-sized companies can provide solar solutions, can provide mini-grids, can provide retail energy solutions. And so that's why this collaboration and partnership with the financial system is so crucial, because the commercial banks, the investors that are in country are best suited for that distribution or that retail delivery. Let's call it the retail delivery.
They can assess the risk. They can manage the loan.
Absolutely. They do a simple collections. I mean, they can do the collections. And that chain has to work. But what I would highlight is that sometimes the banks on the ground or the investors on the ground also need support with assessing credit risk and understanding the projects. And so what we've seen with this type of programming is that the funds don't always flow from the domestic commercial bank into the assets, into the companies. And so there's work that needs to be done with supporting those companies to access those commercial loans, standardizing contracts, standardizing their methodologies to close the loop.
Makes a lot of sense. We're running out of time, so we're just going to take like a minute each, if we would. Valerie, maybe you can pick up Rowan's point, because you earlier talked about bonds being an old instrument, and yet we're still figuring out how to use them somehow. We shouldn't think of them as innovative. Insurance probably falls into the same bucket. How do you see the opportunity around insurance?
And by the way, bonds are debt instruments. I know you know that, Raj. But too often I hear about green bonds being the answer and debt is the problem, when it doesn't make sense. Right. But by the way, debt isn't a dirty word. Many of us here take out loans to go to school, to build a house, to start a business. We see that as an investment. So we have to be careful that we don't demonize debt. because this is how you unlock growth, how you unlock investment. It's important, and that's why the domestic resource mobilization piece that we never talk about enough are domestic money markets, domestic capital markets where they exist, because that's the capillarity where everyday people get access to money. That's where they go and they get their small loan to start their small business that one day could be the biggest business, right? So that's where we get a little bit. MDBs don't have to be, as Serge said, all things to all people. We have to look at specialization. And Rowan and insurance, Rowan has been invited to all of the sexiest parties for years. The problem is we've never figured out how to make insurance work. And Rowan has been trying to help us do this forever. And what worries me more than anything is today we see insurance fleeing markets that are risky from a climate perspective. Instead of increasing market penetration for insurance, we're actually seeing it scared away. So this is one of those holy grail issues. It's a really important tool in the tool basket. We haven't cracked it yet, but we're all really spending a lot of time thinking about it.
James, Diana in the back there, she talked about this challenge with debt, and she flagged the issue of governance, which is kind of your core area of focus. How do you address this reality that the solution to some of these problems might be more debt? Governments may need to go borrow, right? But how do you ensure the governance is there?
Well, thanks. I think the question around debt, as Valerie has said, is we cannot demonize debt. It's a question of accountability. It's governance, and we have to ask, to what extent are we willing to be transparent on what we are investing in as countries, and from a private sector perspective, and thinking the role of the PDBs can play is a question of transparency and project visibility. As an investor, I would look at it as an investor, and of course, I know Diana has mentioned a question around the debt swaps. It's again a question of transparency. How transparent are these debt swaps, and what can we do to ensure that there is certainty? Because even the debt swaps, the governments have to commit to deploying resources to national strategies. So the bottom line is a question of transparent process. Thank you.
And Anna, maybe the last word to you. You're welcome to address one of the questions if you want, but since we're all focused now, leaving this week, Climate Week in UNGA, on COP30, drive home the message of where do the public development banks fit into your agenda at COP30?
I will want to first address two questions. First, the debt issue, I think is really appropriate to talk about that, because the problem is not debt, but the fiscal space of countries to mobilize national funding to adaptation or mitigation. So yes, it's a very important topic, and how to address that, hopefully on the 1.3 trillion report. Some of those ideas will be there. Let us hope on that. On the insurance, I think Valerie said, I think the question is, at the moment there is a penalty for you to be climate vulnerable for most of the countries that never contributed to climate. So you have all regions. So it's how to change and have insurance as a premium for countries or regions or cities that are doing the resilience that we want. So if we have like mayors that are doing, if you have NAPS, the adaptation plans in countries, and you have mayors that have wonderful adaptation plans, they should get a discount on the insurance for their cars or their houses because they're doing the right thing. So I think we need to flip, and so that is on record. COP30 has invited the insurance companies to participate as fully as possible at COP30, so you're really welcome. But I think in terms of, let us go back to COP30. Again, COP29, we were all about finance because it was all about the NCQG. COP30 is really a COP about economics and climate. How can we get the economics of countries, of banks, of households that brings climate perspective to economics and bring economics to the climate perspective? Is that much that we wanted to do? And therefore, development banks, and we've been discussing a lot today, we met in other meetings, because they are absolutely key. And the role of development banks that to go from projects to perhaps guarantors of private sector mobilization. They need to have a different role to play than just looking from project to project, because others can do that now. So which role are that? I think it's at debate, and hopefully we'll be able to come to COP30 with a basket of suggestions rather than now a silver bullet that will fit at all, because what is right for Brazil as an emerging country may be not right for Gambia, or may not be right for India. So we will need to think. It's complex, as Tarine said, it's much more complex, but we need to talk about that complexity. Otherwise, it's going to be top-down, and what we need is bottom-up approaches. Thank you.
It's a beautiful complexity. It's a dynamic market now. It's complicated to understand, but actually it has all the tools that we need for the development and climate agenda. Thank you so much to this panel for breaking all that down. And we are about to have some closing remarks, so take your seat. We're just about to wrap up. I'll ask Serge to join me. Serge, let me just get your impression from the discussion you just heard. It was wide-ranging, but I thought one of the impressive themes that came out to me was that this complexity is actually a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. Well, I think that, what we've heard across this room is undoubtedly a shared conviction that public development banks, regardless of their size, public development banks, and again, from the largest multilateral to the smaller sub-regional banks and even to national banks, can be decisive. It's a decisive force in accelerating climate action, undoubtedly, and sustainable development. I think that's the key element we have, the key takeaway today. But that conviction is not by definition enough. We need to put all this not only in perspective, but into action. And it is something I share as a president of the club, IDFC, but also as the president of the West African Development Bank. So, if I had to give three main remarks, the first and three main priorities. The first one would be, if I may, alignment. As I said earlier, we are reshaping the financial architecture, and in line with what Rémy said again, and with the previous panel has confirmed, is clearly this question of alignment of interest, the need for all of us to redefine the way we should work and naturally work together. That's the first thing. The second thing is mobilization. If we must, all of us, we must conjugate our efforts in crowding private and public capital, undoubtedly. Again, this question of the way we use our balance sheet, we de-risk our portfolio. We work on blended finance. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, we work on blending finance. I think this is again the key element. And the last thing, I would say, not the least, the last thing is undoubtedly this question of ownership. What will happen will definitely be what we want to happen. And all this is in our hands in the new context I've earlier mentioned. And, on our way to COP30, we need to put all this on the ground and make sure that, we get the ownership, we lead, and we will earn our interest.
I'm sure, Serge, some of the people in the room and following this online might be surprised by the level of optimism in the discussion we've had today, given all that's happening. Help them understand, why should we be so optimistic?
Because I strongly believe that, and when you look at the data, I strongly believe that the capital is here. I mean, we have the capital. The market has profound and deep pockets. Now, the point is, how do we navigate in such a way that we get access to this capital? And the way we reorganize ourselves, the way we implement what we mentioned earlier today with Rémy, which is the originate to distribute, which is, again, something that is no new for no banker, but no investment banker. Now we have to implement it in the DFI world, which is another challenge. So that's what we strongly believe, that yes, we have to be optimistic, and we definitely are.
It seems to me the development finance, the climate finance architecture is highly complex.
Yeah.
But that is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And actually, it allows us, this new system will allow us to achieve the objectives in a way the old system, which was much simpler, much more direct, but was much less capital efficient and much less, it had much less ability to scale.
Yeah.
So it's a new era,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of potential for it.
Oh, definitely. And I think that the DFI, the development world, the development bank, are more and more headed and led by bankers. Bankers. Look, the background of AJ Banga, the background of Stephen Wintel's KfW, etc., etc. They're bankers.
Yeah.
They're bankers. They're no development bankers, they're bankers. And the principle, as simple as it appears to be, a banker has to bank. That's it. As simple as that. As simple as that.
Well, we will leave it there. That's a fantastic
Thank
way
you.
to close.
Thank you very much.
Discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Serge
Merci.
Ekué, thank you so much to our partners who made this event possible, and to all of you. Thank you. Good night.